In the American Southwest, there's an ancient village that defies simple explanation. Perched hundreds of feet in the air, it's a site that is part geologic wonder, part human marvel. Only one way of entry. You're either getting in through that door, or you're falling a few hundred feet to your death. It was built in such a hidden location that it wasn't rediscovered until the mid-1900s, and only then by sheer accident. Stretching nearly a quarter mile along a sheer face, you can't help but ask, why would people live in such a treacherous location? In this episode, I embark on a mission to explore this stunning site and examine the questions of why, how, and who. Hey everybody, it's Andrew from Desert Drifter. Thanks for tuning in. I visited the spot once years ago, and I was pretty young in my unofficial Southwestern career. And it was just a spot that, really wowed me. So we're gonna explore it and take in the uniqueness of it. But I also want to kind of tell the fuller picture to why these places exist, because I feel like part of the danger is if you only take a look at these people from a snapshot of their lives, which would be these cliff dwellings, it can present an incomplete and possibly even harmful perspective of who they were and why they were doing what they were doing. Imagine if somebody took a snapshot of your life or my life, and that one snapshot is what defined us for the rest of our lives. There's the first glimpse of them, up under the overhang there. Everything about this place is concealed. Really the only places you could see them from is kind of the vicinity of where I'm standing, a little bit of this rim right here, and then this maybe, half-mile section of rim here. If I didn't know where it was, there's nothing that would distinguish it from the other miles and miles of canyon rim up here. When you think about this place in the context of just a maze of canyons and miles of canyon rim, and it really makes this place like a needle in a haystack, or one in a million. I walked a little bit further down, and so you can look even further to the right. You can see more stretched all along there. We'll actually enter into the right over here, and then basically walk this hidden ledge below me back around to there. It's the location is just sublime. Seeing the route down, I started my descent. There's no other access point into this village. Fear of heights was not a valid fear in this community, I don't believe. Like a lot of fears, I think when you have to face it, there's no other choice than, you can overcome it. The desire to survive is a strong force. So it's this sandstone ramp, basically, that takes you down below the rim, like right in where those shadows are. The way you drop below the rim and get out of the harsh sunlight, and all of a sudden you're here under the shade, it does make you feel like you're entering some kind of an underworld. Okay, here we are. Now almost immediately you start seeing the remains of some ruins and some walls. These are generally fairly beat up, so we'll continue on down the ledge. So you scramble over a few boulders, and then you keep pushing on. Now back here is really where things get interesting. You've got this seep that comes out of the canyon rim. So in addition to all the drips, so you got this large pothole, some people call them tanks, back here with a significant amount of water in it. I don't really see how this community would have been viable, without this source of water back here. I camped out last night overlooking this whole area. And as I was sitting up there eating dinner, looking out over all of it, I was like, there's nothing that distinguishes this little finger of this canyon from, any other of hundreds of similar features, throughout this area. And, there's no sign that says like spring right here. There's no big grove of cottonwood trees that would sort of give away the presence of water. And so I just started to think about, man, what was the evolution of the knowledge of the spring like over, the course of time through generations? I mean, finding that seep is a feat in of itself, and not to mention, building there and living there. So the spring is right back in this region, around the bend. Here's the next obvious structure. Again, pretty beat down. I continued on down the ledge from the spring, coming first to a few dilapidated foundations. What they were, I don't know. Just a short ways beyond them. So this is really interesting. Certainly seems like a defensive position. The people stacked up other rocks here, and I assume this would have been taller at one point in time. Possibly this was kind of the doorway. A lot of the ledge, back through here, I entered over there. It's wider. It'd be a little bit harder to defend if that was your goal. But here, probably partly because of the help of this huge natural fallen boulder, maybe this one over here as well, this was a place that a defense could be waged very easily by, just a small number of defenders against attackers. I mean, for me, it's impossible not to imagine this community as being, defensively oriented. Right past the wall, the remains again of small structure. And right here, I mean, the ledge is still incredibly wide. This is almost like a patio, a back deck. I mean, it's really easy to imagine people sitting up here, socializing, hanging out, getting work done. It's really comfortable. I mean, it's beautiful, but it's not going to stay like that. This area is not just an archaeological wonder, but a natural one as well. I lingered here a while, marveling at its uniqueness. This cliff band is hidden, but still accessible. It's defensible, but still livable. Treacherous, but manageable. Desolate, but with a natural spring inside of it. What are the odds of a place like this existing? So here is really the first choke point. And where you would expect, you've got a big wall right here, complete with a couple of peepholes. Only one way of entry. You're either getting in through that door, or you're falling a few hundred feet to your death. The other side of it. What's interesting is as soon as you get past that wall, you get the major construction going on. Up until this point, it's generally kind of scattered buildings, but once you get past that defensive wall, that's really where the bulk of it begins. And right up here is probably one of the most unique aspects of this entire site. It should be clear now that this village's main focus was to protect itself. Taken at face value, you might assume that native tribes in the Southwest were either wildly violent or clinically paranoid. If we had evidence that people lived in cliff dwellings like this for thousands of years, that might be a solid conclusion to draw. But that's not what archaeology shows us. When these cliff dwellings are dated, using wooden core sampling, known as dendrochronology, they almost always return dates between the 12th and 14th centuries, or roughly 700 to 900 years ago. Of course, there are some outliers on either side. Before people retreated into these high places, they generally lived on mesa tops or in the bottoms of canyons in a dwelling known as a pit house. This way of life went on for many centuries, and the people don't seem to be abnormally preoccupied with defending themselves. As far as we can tell, life was relatively stable. But something changed because people began retreating into the cliffs in droves. There's a kiva here, right on the edge of the canyon, looking out westward. You can see the juniper bark down here that they used in the construction. Historically, you could have entered it from the top. Now we go through what looks like a doorway here, and a few feet from hundreds of feet below you. This is where things get a little steep. Definitely a no-fall zone. And in here, the professional study of this place is evident because you have little markers from where tree ring cores were taken. There's a much newer support beam placed here just to try to keep this roof up as long as possible. Clearly, time is going to take its toll like it does on all of us. The tree ring cores from this village return dates from 1232 to 1260, meaning those were the years this village was being constructed. You know, it's really a fascinating spot to sit and just consider the ceremonies, the conversations that have been had in this place. To get an up-close look at the construction is also, really unique. Just notice it looks like an old grinding stone in here, an old metate. Wonder what those mean. To get to see so much of the original plaster work in here, is really special. And in places where it is deteriorating, you can see how it was constructed. The location of this kiva is dramatic, to say the least. Some might call it sublime. This entire village sits about 400 feet or 122 meters off the canyon floor. There's no spot where this is more evident than here. This kiva is the evolution of the previously mentioned pit houses. It was likely the center of this community's religious and ceremonial life. As you can see, there's a 2-story building attached to this kiva. I assume it was for housing, but I don't know for sure. Undoubtedly a little storage unit tucked in back here. Still with a solitary corn cob in there. Pretty interesting. There's 2 carved steps right here, likely to help people access this, carrying heavy loads and whatnot. You can tell this was a lot more at one point in time. There's these rooms in the back here. There's a lot of blackening on the ceiling, so they were likely dwelling quarters. And some pretty big sized timbers used in this as well. As you can see, some of the ventilation system right here, you can tell it reaches all the way into this room, so it just was used to carry the smoke out of here. So there's the last cluster of buildings. The overhang sort of fades out for a bit. You've got nothing. And then here it begins again. So why? Why live here? Why raise your family on a nearly inaccessible cliff? Well, this is where things get complicated. A multitude of theories abound. The ones that hold the most credibility are connected to the evidence of an incredibly severe series of droughts that pummeled the region in the 13th century. There is also good evidence that significant deforestation and overhunting of game had made life much, much more difficult. I believe changing climatic conditions had to play a key role, but there may have been other, more nefarious causes as well. Judging by the size of these structures, further on this end here, I do wonder if a lot of this was mostly storage space and a lot of the living quarters were back behind us. It's cool to see these big sandstone slabs used as door frames or window frames. Check this out, it's like a very small little cubby hole in here. So this is a little different. This is like an in-ground storage cyst here. It would have been covered up with a big sandstone slab sealed off with that. Little corn cob still in there. This village is made up of over 40 different structures. The sheer size of this place is captivating, not to mention its location. Before my trip here, I had wondered what it would be like to visit a second time. Would I be less impressed or unengaged? Would it feel like going through the motions? Thankfully, it was none of the above. I found myself riveted, but in a very somber kind of way. I tried to imagine a day in the life of the people here and contrasted their perspective with that of us today. For some of us, the cliff edges and heights would make this village our worst nightmare. And yet, for these ancient ones, this might have been the only place in their entire world where they actually felt safe. The ledge gets thinner and thinner the further you go. And this is pretty much the end of everything right down here. Pretty dizzying. I do not want to be the person walking this when these flakes decide it is time to go. And after carrying on for so long, the ledge basically comes to an end right up here. So what do we make of all this? Well, I think most of us will look at this village and say they were protecting themselves from something or someone. So who or what might they have been hiding from? Once again, it depends who you ask. Some say life had become so difficult, and as a result, the societal structure so fractured that it became every small family or tribal band for themselves. Violence and theft became widespread. People fought to survive. You couldn't trust anyone, except the small group you were with. Others say new tribes, like the Athabascan peoples migrated in from the north, upset the balance of power, and warfare between these two different groups created the fear. Still others say that centuries before, a people group migrated into the southwest from present-day Mexico. They created an empire of sorts, with Chaco Canyon the center of their power. They ruled by enslavement, cannibalism, and fear, and for a time there was stability because of this. But as all empires eventually do, they collapsed, and in the political vacuum of their downfall, chaos ensued. What about the modern-day Pueblos, the many federally recognized tribes who trace their ancestry to the people who built this site? What explanation do they give to this? Well, they don't always like to talk about it to outsiders, but when they do, many of their oral histories acknowledge the fact that their ancestors were destined to migrate. Some tribal historians recognize the evidence of prehistoric climate change and attribute this to a push from their gods, reminding the people they weren't in their final destination and they needed to move on. These people's descendants are still in this region today, and that's important to remember. Whatever the threats were, it was real enough to drive people to extreme living situations. It's interesting to note that when archaeologists studied this particular site, they found no evidence of a violent past. Did this community escape by sheer luck? Or was their location so impregnable that no one dared challenge it? These people did what they needed to do in order to survive, as all people have throughout time and across cultures. What these people left stands as a testament to their fortitude and adaptability. Simple explanations escape us, and that is what motivates me to search further and dig deeper into the past and its peoples.